The sirens hadn't started yet. In the heart of Jackson Heights, the square was quiet, tense quiet. Old bricks underfoot, fading murals on crumbling walls, and hands held up in silent protest. Signs read no more, "Justice for Devon, we can't breathe again." Among them stood an old woman wrapped in a worn church coat, skin like dark leather stretched over fragile bones, her eyes sharp and unblinking behind gold-rimmed glasses. Miss Ernestine. She hadn't missed a protest in 60 years. From Selma to today. She wasn't about to miss this one. They came in lines. No warning, no dialogue. Just stomping boots and black armor. Helmets with mirrored visors. Rifles not slung, but gripped. The word police was all anyone could see. Bigger than names, bigger than faces, bigger than any damn truth. The front row started backing up. Then running. The old knew better. Miss Ernestine stood still. She had done this before. Her hands lifted, slow, deliberate, fingers spread like a preacher giving blessing. A cop barked, "Move now." She didn't. He charged. She didn't flinch. The baton cracked across her arm, then her side. She dropped like a coat hanger collapsing. 2 more officers stepped in. Her blood painted the sidewalk like spilled wine from a broken communion cup. No one moved. Phones were up, yes. Some recorded. Most stared. Because it was fast. Because it was expected. Because this had happened before. A teenager tried to run in. A baton shoved him back. Someone screamed, "She's 80, for Christ's sake." Didn't matter. They beat her like she was a threat. And then a sound cut through it. Not a siren. A voice. Low. Familiar. Carved in gravel and rust. "You done?" They turned. One officer muttered, "Oh no." Mike Tyson stepped forward. No entourage. No security. No gloves. Black hoodie, gray sweats, silence in his stride. He looked down at the blood. Then at the man holding the baton. "You hit her." The cop hesitated. She was resisting. Tyson's jaw flexed. Resisting what? Breathing. Another step. The line of police tensed. "You're interfering," the sergeant snapped. Tyson didn't blink. "You're beating my teacher." The youngest officer looked confused. "What?" "She taught me to read. Fed me when I had nothing. That woman saved more lives than any of you ever will. She's under arrest." Tyson's eyes didn't move. "Then take me too." Nobody moved. The air held its breath. Then the cop, either too scared or too proud, stepped forward, baton raised. Bad idea. Tyson didn't hit him hard. Just enough. A short right to the ribs, followed by a palm shove that sent the man tumbling into his own. 1 swing. 2 step. Done. No brutality. Just finality. He crouched beside Miss Ernestine. She was conscious. Barely. He wiped blood from her cheek with the edge of his sleeve. "It's okay," he whispered. "You're not alone." She looked up at him with eyes clouded in pain. "They don't see us, Mikey." "I do." A medic came, finally. Civilians broke the line. The cops didn't move again. Some still recorded. Some just cried. Because in that moment, there was no legend. No fighter. Just a man holding the woman who had once held him. He helped lift her onto the stretcher. Walked beside it. Never looking away. The footage hit the internet before the ambulance doors closed. 1 minute long. No cuts. No music. No commentary. A woman being beaten. A man stepping in. A cop falling. The name Tyson trended within 15 minutes. But for the first time in years, it wasn't about a knockout. It was about presence. Nobody asked who the old woman was, at first. But they would. They'd learn about the house she'd turned into a literacy center. The marches she led. The young men she fed. The teens she counseled when the city gave up on them. They'd learn about how many city hall meetings she'd sat through, shaking her cane at men who smiled too wide while doing nothing. They'd learn about how she'd written letters to every mayor since 1975. And how none ever wrote back. But not yet. Right now, she was just a body on a stretcher. And he was just the man who said no. Tyson didn't speak to the press that night. Didn't post. Didn't tweet. He sat on the curb outside the hospital, hoodie up, elbows on knees, staring into nothing. His fists were still clenched, not from rage, but memory. That woman had caught him after a fight when he was 13. Nose broken, shirt torn, future already in pieces. She'd made him sit on her porch for 3 hours reading Baldwin aloud while holding an ice pack to his face. "You can fight," she told him. "But if you don't read, the world will never know why." She was right. But the world hadn't changed. They still didn't care why. They just kept swinging. So maybe it was time someone swung back. Not with fists. With truth. With consequence. He closed his eyes. Tomorrow would come loud. But tonight there was only the blood on his sleeve. And the sound of an old woman whispering through broken teeth. "Don't let them bury me quiet." He wouldn't. Not this time. The hospital room smelled like bleach and waiting. Machines beeped in rhythm, steady but fragile. Tyson sat beside her, elbows on his knees, head down. She hadn't woken up since the ambulance ride. Tubes ran from her arms. Bruises bloomed across her skin like slow fires. His hands itched, not with rage but memory. He hadn't been called Iron Mike in a long time. That man had died in stages. Prison. Rehab. Solitude. Now he ran a youth gym with broken windows and worn gloves, funded with whatever scraps he could pull together from speaking gigs and old favors. It wasn't much, but it kept a few kids out of the system. He hadn't thrown a punch in years. He hadn't needed to. Until yesterday. The headlines weren't about Ernestine. Not yet. They were about him. Tyson assaults officer. Tyson intervenes. Tyson's rage returns. But they didn't see what he saw. They didn't remember the woman who taught him how to read when he was just another angry kid with fists but no words. She found him at 14, full of noise and nowhere to put it. He'd broken another kid's jaw over a pair of sneakers. She made him sweep the church basement for a week before she'd even talk to him. Then one day she handed him a book. The Fire Next Time by Baldwin. He told her he didn't read. She said, "Then listen." So he listened. Her voice slow, steady, dragging each word out like it mattered. He didn't understand all of it, but he remembered how it made him feel, like someone knew the fire inside him wasn't evil. Just misplaced. That was the first time anyone gave a damn about where his mind went when his fists stopped moving. Now she lay still, bones rattling under skin, the world ignoring her again. A knock at the door broke the silence. A young nurse peeked in. "She's stable." "That's all we know." Tyson nodded. "You know her?" "She raised me," he said. "Not legally. Not on paper. But yeah." The nurse swallowed. "She's lucky you were there." He shook his head. "We weren't supposed to need luck." The door closed. He stood and walked out into the hallway. The media had already gathered outside. Protesters. Reporters. Caught. He ignored them all and drove home, silence wrapped around him like an old robe. At the gym the next morning, the kids were already buzzing. "Yo, coach, you really dropped that cop? Man, he flew like a cartoon. You see the video hit 1 million views?" He didn't answer. Just taped his hands and started working the bag. They didn't get it yet. They were still high on the moment, the flash. But that wasn't why he did it. One of the older kids, Malik, followed him into the office. "You good?" "No." "You going back to TV?" "No." "What now then?" Tyson looked at the kid. 17, smart, angry, ready to break if no one caught him soon. He remembered that edge. "I need you to do something." "Yeah. I want every kid who's ever come through here to meet at the rec center Friday night. No gloves. No pads. Just people." "For what?" "Talk." Malik blinked. "You serious?" Tyson didn't blink. "Dead." Friday came fast. Word spread. Not through flyers or posts, but through whispers and phone calls and old heads passing it down. Tyson stood at the front of the rec room, surrounded by folding chairs and dim lights. Kids came. Adults came. Some old, some new. A few local organizers. A schoolteacher. Even a guy in a maintenance uniform who once did time with Tyson 20 years back. They all came because Ernestine had touched someone they knew. Tyson didn't give a speech. He didn't know how to make it poetic. He just said, "She gave us words. So now we speak." And they did. One by one. A girl talked about her brother getting shot in the back over a stolen bike. A man talked about the job he lost because of an old charge from when he was 16. A mother cried about her son, locked up for defending himself, and no lawyer who gave a damn. Tyson just listened. When it was over, no one clapped. They just stood a little straighter. That night, Tyson sat on the floor of his apartment and wrote the first real letter he'd written in years. Handwritten. Ink smudged. No edits. To the mayor. It wasn't a request. It was a statement. We will not be quiet. We will not be careful. We will not be polite about our survival. You've heard our pain. Now you'll hear our plan. He signed it. Michael Tyson. Community. Fighter. Witness. He didn't ask for a reply. The next morning, cameras swarmed his gym. He said nothing. Just put a sign on the door, closed for healing. But behind those doors, something was starting. He began calling people he hadn't spoken to in decades. An ex-lawyer who got disbarred for pushing too hard against the system. A teacher who left the district after being told to keep race out of it. A nurse who once helped Ernestine open a food pantry with no permits, just folding tables and faith. One by one, they came back. They called it the Iron Legacy Initiative. Not for Tyson, but for what was left behind when fists were done swinging. A movement for forgotten mentors. For elders who didn't have phones to film their beatings. For voices that didn't trend but never stopped speaking. Tyson didn't want a march. He wanted roots. He started teaching the kids how to de-escalate, not just fights but fear. How to talk to cameras. How to document injustice. How to protect without violence. How to hold a line. He taught them to stand tall without swinging. Because fists win moments. But presence wins change. And if he learned anything from Ernestine, it was this. A fight isn't over when the punch lands, it's over when silence returns. And this time, he wouldn't let silence win. The video hit 10 million views before noon. People weren't just watching it. They were studying it frame by frame. Tyson's voice. The baton. The fall. The silence that followed. Talk shows played it on loops. Politicians stumbled through statements. Celebrities posted one-liners. None of it mattered. Tyson hadn't spoken yet. He sat by Ernestine's bedside while the world debated what he was. Hero. Criminal. Threat. Savior. He didn't care. All that mattered was that she was still breathing. The cop he dropped had a bruised rib, a sprained wrist, and a microphone in his face. He called Tyson a thug. Claimed self-defense. Claimed confusion. Claimed nothing made sense. But the footage didn't lie. The truth was clear. An old woman was beaten, and Tyson stopped it. The rest was noise. By the afternoon, 100 protesters were outside the hospital. By night, it was 1,000. They held signs with Tyson's face, with Ernestine's name, with every name that came before hers. Faces of the dead. The beaten. The forgotten. Tyson finally stepped outside at midnight. He didn't raise his fist. He raised his phone. "I'm not a hero," he said into the lens. "I did what any man should have done. What too many didn't." The clip went viral. Again. But this time, it wasn't about violence. It was about presence. He stood alone, no podium, no banner. Just truth. "They beat the woman who taught me to read," he continued. "I don't care about optics. I care about justice. If that scares you, good." Next morning, he walked into City Hall unannounced. No cameras. No reporters. The mayor refused to meet him. So he left a note. "You ignored her letters for 30 years. Don't ignore her blood." By noon, he was back at the gym. Kids were lined up outside, not to train, but to listen. He told them what happened. Plain. No hype. No legend. Just a story about a woman who deserved better. Then he laid down rules. No fights in the street. No fires. No looting. We do this smart. We do this steady. If you want to throw something, throw truth. He showed them how to film without shaking. How to ask questions that couldn't be dodged. How to speak so clearly that even those trying not to hear had to listen. He gave them jobs. Document everything, record the old folks' stories, protect protesters from both fists and lies. Not one camera crew made it inside. That was on purpose. This wasn't about headlines. This was about change. The next protest was different. No chants. Just silence. Thousands stood shoulder to shoulder, holding up books. Baldwin. Lord. Hughes. Morrison. The very books Ernestine used to hand out for free, one at a time, with handwritten notes tucked inside. The police didn't know what to do. They waited. Waited for anger. Waited for the first brick, the first bottle, the excuse. It never came. Instead, Tyson stepped forward and handed an officer a copy of The Fire Next Time. "Read it," he said. "Then we'll talk." The officer didn't respond. But the photo made front pages. That night, the city council held an emergency meeting. Not because they cared, but because the world was watching. Tyson didn't attend. He didn't need to. The people were speaking for him now. In a week, local donations tripled for the youth gym. A city contractor offered to fix the broken roof for free. Someone from D.C. called about collaborating on community outreach. He hung up mid-sentence. He wasn't interested in handshakes. He wanted commitments. He released a public demand. "We want full investigation of the officers involved, public apology to Miss Ernestine, funding for 3 community centers, and a citywide educational program on citizen rights." They ignored him. Until he held a press conference in front of the precinct. No shouting. Just stories. People took turns at the mic, telling the times they were stopped, searched, shoved. Told to move, told to shut up, told to stay in their place. Then Tyson stepped up last. He said nothing. Just held up Ernestine's cane. The image said more than any speech could. Next day, the mayor blinked. Disciplinary review underway. No charges yet. But cracks were forming. A former officer came forward anonymously, admitting there was a quiet policy to target protests preemptively. Another leaked internal memos about suppressing complaints. The dam was breaking. Still, Tyson didn't celebrate. He went to the hospital. She was awake. Her voice was weak, but steady. "They're listening now," she said. "Yeah," he nodded. "Finally." She grabbed his wrist. "Make them remember." He promised. And he meant it. The following week, a group of elders, retired teachers, social workers, faith leaders, asked to meet him. He agreed. They weren't there to praise him. They were there to ask for help. They were tired. Tired of marching, shouting, being ignored. They didn't want speeches. They wanted structure. So he gave it to them. The Iron Legacy Initiative went public that Friday. Mission: protect and preserve the lives, stories, and dignity of those who carried the fight before us. Core team: led by elders, backed by youth, shielded by community. No politics. No parties. Just protection. Within days, chapters popped up in 4 cities. Donations rolled in. Schools started asking for speakers. Police departments issued cautious statements. But none of that changed the truth. A woman had nearly died. And if Tyson hadn't stepped in, she would have been another name on a list too long to finish. He kept the baton. Not as a trophy, but a reminder. Of what silence costs. Of what action demands. Of what one man, standing up, can start. Because one blow didn't end the system. But it cracked it. And through that crack, the light got in. The state attorney released a statement calling the incident complex. The usual script followed: pending investigations, internal reviews, respect for due process. No mention of Ernestine. No mention of Tyson. Just sanitized distance. Tyson responded with a list. Names, dates, cases closed without justice. Each one backed by footage, paperwork, testimony. It was a ledger of silence. He posted it with a caption, "Nothing complex. Just ignored." The document spread fast. Activists printed copies and handed them out at train stations. Volunteers read them aloud on street corners. Teachers posted them on classroom doors. People didn't protest with slogans now. They recited facts. On the 5th day after Ernestine awoke, Tyson sat beside her in the hospital again. She watched the news, muted, as officials danced around questions. "Cowards in suits," she murmured. He nodded. "They're hoping we get tired." "We won't." They didn't. The Iron Legacy Initiative started setting up watch hubs. Teams of trained civilians monitoring protests, documenting every movement, every word. They wore orange bands. No masks. Full transparency. They didn't confront. They recorded. It worked. The police couldn't push without consequence. The footage from those hubs began feeding legal cases. Defense attorneys reached out. Public defenders asked for help gathering testimonies. The city noticed. That week, a detective knocked on Tyson's gym door. He didn't flinch. "We've reopened 4 use-of-force cases," the detective said. "Because it's right?" Tyson asked. "No," the man replied. "Because now we're scared of losing our jobs." Tyson almost laughed. Not from humor, from exhaustion. Fear made them move. Not shame. Not morality. Still, it was motion. The gym became a command post. Not just for training, but for organizing. Tyson cleared the ring. Set up tables. Brought in chairs. Young people ran point. Old heads gave direction. They had no leader. Just a cause. They didn't seek approval. They gave notice. The next protest was at the courthouse. Hundreds stood in suits and Sunday clothes. No music. No slogans. They brought typewriters and began typing affidavits on the sidewalk. Stories. Statements. Testimonies. Click. Clack. Truth. The sound rattled windows. The DA tried to dismiss it as theater. Until the affidavits landed on his desk. Box after box. Verified. Cross-referenced. Signed. 1,000 stories of abuse, neglect, dismissal. One truth. They were done waiting. Tyson never raised his voice in public. He didn't need to. He spoke with presence. He walked into city council chambers one evening, uninvited. They paused the meeting. He took a seat in the front row. Folded his arms. He didn't say a word. But every member at that table adjusted their posture. Fear moved things. But conviction built them. 3 weeks in, the city caved to the first demand: community oversight for police misconduct cases. The board would be half civilian, half legal professionals. Tyson refused to join. "This isn't about me," he said. "Let the people carry it." He returned to the gym. The kids were still training. Still learning. One of them, Jared, asked him, "You think it's working?" Tyson looked him in the eye. "You're still standing. That means it is." That night, Ernestine asked him to wheel her outside. She hadn't breathed fresh air since the assault. They sat beneath a flickering streetlight near the hospital loading dock. She looked out over the city skyline. Lit up. Buzzing. "I remember when they tried to kill me for drinking from the wrong fountain," she said. "They still try," he replied. "They just wear different clothes now." He stayed quiet. She turned her head. "What happens when you leave?" "I'm not leaving. You can't stay everywhere forever." He thought about it. "No," he said. "But I can build something that does." The next day, Iron Legacy launched its most ambitious project yet, a digital archive. Not just names, stories, videos, audio, oral histories, court transcripts, newspaper clippings. Every piece tied to another, mapped, tracked, made permanent. No more erasure. A truth that couldn't be buried. Youth teams collected data, digitized record. Elders recorded their testimonies. A group of coders volunteered from out of state. Within 10 days, the archive was live. People called it a second internet. The site crashed from traffic on day 1. By day 3, universities were requesting access for research. No more asking for attention. They were commanding it. The department tried damage control, press releases, diversity hires, public outreach. Tyson ignored all of it. He didn't want a seat at their table. He was building his own. By the second month, protests had spread to 12 cities. Not riots. Not chaos. Disruption with structure. Tyson got a letter in the mail. No return address. Just 4 words: "You changed the playbook." He folded it and put it in his back pocket. They were watching. All of them. Government, media, police, institutions. And they were off balance. Because they expected rage. Expected fire. But this wasn't about fire. This was about permanence. By month 3, the mayor called for a public reconciliation event. Asked Tyson to speak. He declined. Sent Ernestine instead. She entered with a cane, moving slow but upright. When she reached the mic, she didn't thank anyone. She said, "I'm still here. And so are we. And if you think this ends with apologies, you haven't been listening." The crowd didn't cheer. They nodded. Because it wasn't a performance. It was a reckoning. The system didn't collapse. But it bent. And bending under truth is the first step toward breaking under justice. Tyson walked home that night alone. No cameras. No chance. Just a quiet city. But behind every window someone was watching. And this time, they weren't afraid of what might happen. They were ready for what would. Winter came late that year. The cold rolled in quiet, but it didn't slow anything down. The Iron Legacy archive passed 1 million entries, each one verified, cross-linked, searchable, truth in bulk. A group of law students used the database to reverse a wrongful conviction. Then another. And another. 3 freed in 1 month. Local news tried to credit the firms. The families corrected them on record. This was built by us. Not them. Tyson didn't attend the hearings. He never showed up for victories. He showed up for work. Every day the gym opened. Kids came in with questions, left with resolve. Elders sat on folding chairs, telling stories most books wouldn't print. A new mural went up outside the gym wall. Not of Tyson. Not of Ernestine. Of 100 faces, blurred, layered, many unnamed. The caption underneath: "The weight we carry." City Hall requested a formal partnership. Tyson sent back 2 sentences. "You don't partner with people you tried to silence. You listen to them." No further talks happened. Meanwhile, Ernestine started walking again. Short steps. Painful ones. But hers. She refused a wheelchair. "My body isn't finished," she said. She insisted on returning to her old bookstore, the one she lost years ago to rising rent and bureaucratic red tape. The building was boarded up, marked for demolition. She stood in front of it for an hour without speaking. Then she pointed at the iron gate. "Tell them I want it back." Within 2 weeks, volunteers had cleared the weeds, pulled down the boards, cleaned the graffiti. Contractors offered services for free. Local artists pledged to rebuild the signage. Tyson paid for nothing. He just made one call. The owner who'd bought it at auction called back. "You're Tyson. You can afford this." Tyson replied, "I don't buy back what was stolen." The owner laughed. Until protesters stood outside his office with receipts, timelines, documents tracing the shady transfer of property from Ernestine's name to a shell company. The city got nervous. 3 council members resigned within the week. The property was returned the next day. No sale. Quietly. Anonymously. Ernestine didn't gloat. She opened the door, stepped inside, and said, "Put the shelves back." It reopened under a new name, The Long Memory. Books were free. Donations optional. Every visitor got a slip of paper. What you know, you carry. What you forget, you lose twice. The shop became more than a bookstore. It was a checkpoint, a classroom, a temple of resistance made of ink and spine. Tyson visited often, but didn't linger. Too many people treated him like a symbol. He didn't want to become a statue. He wanted to stay useful. He met with ex-cons who were mentoring inside juvenile halls. He helped fund mental health pop-ups run by volunteers who'd survived the system. He trained 5 young organizers to speak better than him. Smarter, sharper, quicker to say what needed saying. He stepped back without stepping away. That's when the counter-effort started. Not obvious. Quiet sabotage. Local officials claimed zoning violations near Iron Legacy facilities. Donations got flagged for compliance reviews. Anonymous reports filed against youth volunteers. It wasn't rage. It was bureaucracy. The slow choke of red tape. Tyson didn't panic. He documented everything, then published it. 1 file per day. Each with commentary from law experts, community advocates, and victims of the same tactic. They called it the squeeze files. Suddenly, local politicians stopped answering emails. The governor issued a statement about abuses of code enforcement power. No one bought it. Tyson didn't respond. He didn't need to. The public did. The files were shared millions of times. Universities built curriculum around them. One city council candidate won on a platform of ending weaponized paperwork. People were adapting, learning the moves. Tyson smiled once, alone, when he saw a young girl teaching others how to file public records requests at a library. She was 10. Momentum kept growing. Not just in cities, towns, suburbs, rural routes. People started creating legacy outposts. Tiny rooms in rec centers, barbershops, laundromats, places to learn rights, document abuse, connect with organizers. No logos, no leaders, just presence. And presence couldn't be erased. Then the state made its move. A bill quietly introduced. The Civic Accountability Regulation Act. It banned non-governmental groups from archiving police-related data. Cited privacy concerns. No hearings. No public discussion. Tyson read the bill at dawn. He posted one sentence. They're afraid of memory. By noon, protests were scheduled in every major city. Not against police. Against forgetting. People marched with USB drives strung around their necks. Data as resistance. Every file was a bulletproof truth. When the vote came, they filled the Capitol step. Quiet. Focused. The bill passed anyway. Tyson didn't yell. He sent instructions. Back up everything. Then flood the web. Within hours, the archive was mirrored in 10 countries. Foreign media picked up the story. The act was repealed 3 weeks later. No apologies. But no one forgot. By spring, Ernestine stood in front of her bookstore during a school field trip. A child asked her, "Why did they hit you?" She paused. "Because I didn't bow." The child nodded like that made sense. Then asked, "Why didn't you?" Ernestine smiled. "Because I was raised right." Tyson wasn't there that day. He was in another city, helping launch a legacy outpost in a community that hadn't protested in 30 years. When he returned, Ernestine handed him a book. It was her own, typed on an old machine. Cover hand-stitched. Title, "What I Remember So You Don't Have to." He opened to the first page. "I am not a victim," it read. "I am the start of a record." Tyson closed the book and nodded. Everything built so far had been a warning. Now came the blueprint. The legacy outposts spread faster than anyone had imagined. It wasn't just about resisting the system anymore. It was about reshaping it from the inside out. People weren't just documenting stories. They were building networks, creating mutual aid groups, forming a new type of community that didn't rely on the state to function. Tyson didn't lead it all. He was the spark, but the fire had taken on a life of its own. He visited outposts, but only to listen. The young organizers, the ones who had grown up in the shadow of systemic violence, were now the ones who knew how to navigate the complicated landscape of law and politics. They had become experts in strategy and resistance. They didn't need Tyson the way they once did. They needed each other. And that was the point. This wasn't about one man, one act, one moment of glory. It was about everyone. The thousands of voices that had been silenced were now speaking in unison, unstoppable. Ernestine's bookstore, the long memory, had become a cultural hub. People came from all over, not just to read or learn, but to share what they had seen and heard. In the back corner, an old man named Malcolm ran a truth booth, where people could record their stories for preservation. Every afternoon, the line stretched down the block. The media had moved on. They weren't interested in the quiet victories. The city had stopped calling for photo ops with Tyson. They thought it was over. They thought they could outlast the wave of unrest. But the wave had become a tide. Every day, new volunteers arrived, bringing with them knowledge, resources, and experiences that had been buried under years of neglect. They didn't just come for the fight. They came for the future. They came to make sure that this time, history wouldn't repeat itself. Then the new wave hit, the economic pressure. Gentrification. High rents. Mass evictions. Developers were moving in to reclaim the city. The struggle wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about survival. The old fights had returned, wearing new clothes. But now there was a difference. The people had learned. They were prepared. The outposts had become centers of resistance that couldn't be ignored. The threat of displacement was met with solidarity. Neighbors stood together. They refused to leave. Tyson's phone rang more often, but now it was from people asking for help organizing rallies, not interventions. He was still needed, but in a different way. He would give advice, but he didn't need to be in front anymore. He had done what he had set out to do, he had started something. Now others were running with it. One of the young leaders, Maya, called him up one evening. She wanted him to meet her at the newly opened community center. It was a small building, but they had turned it into a functioning resource hub. People came for food, for legal assistance, for guidance. The walls were plastered with flyers about tenant rights, workers' rights, and upcoming protest actions. It was a real center of resistance. Maya greeted him at the door with a hug. "It's happening, Tyson," she said, her eyes shining with excitement. "It's all falling into place. People are organizing everywhere. They're learning how to fight back in ways we never imagined." Tyson smiled, but he saw the weariness in her face. The kind of tiredness that came from fighting battles that never seemed to end. "I see it. But how are you holding up?" Maya sighed, shaking her head. "There's so much to do. Every day it's something new. But we're doing it. We're getting stronger." They sat in a small meeting room surrounded by maps and charts, each one outlining the next steps in their ongoing struggle. Tyson listened, watching as Maya laid out plans for upcoming tenant unions, and the new push to block the developers from taking over the historic district. The city was still trying to sell everything off, piece by piece, but now the people weren't just accepting it. "Everyone is waking up," Maya said, pointing to a chart that detailed the growth of their support network. "We have over 200 outposts now. And the people we've trained are starting to run the show. They're the ones making calls, organizing the protests, speaking at the rallies." Tyson's eyes lingered on the board. "You've done more than I ever imagined. This is bigger than I thought it could be." Maya gave a small laugh, her exhaustion creeping into her voice. "You gave us the tools. But it's us doing the work now. You lit the fire. We're just trying to keep it going." They sat in silence for a moment, both reflecting on everything that had changed in the past year. The struggle was far from over, but it was different now. The momentum was irreversible. The system was bending, not breaking, but it was bending. "Tyson," Maya began, her tone serious, "there's something else. The city is getting desperate. We're hearing rumors they're going to start targeting the outposts directly. They're going to try to shut us down." Tyson didn't flinch. He'd been expecting this. The system had a way of striking back when it felt its power slipping. He had already seen it. The quiet sabotage, the false reports, the attempts to undermine the movement. It was only going to get worse. "We've prepared," Maya continued. "But I need you to know, We're not going anywhere. Not without a fight. Tyson stood up, his resolve hardening. Good. Because neither am I. That night, a new type of strategy session began. This wasn't about rallies anymore. This was about safeguarding what they had built. They would need to strengthen their alliances. They would need to ensure the media was on their side. They would need to ensure that the archives were unbreakable. Their resistance had already moved beyond the physical protests. Now it was about establishing systems that couldn't be torn down. A new social fabric that was resistant to both violence and bureaucracy. The next day, the city issued a formal warning. They were taking action to reclaim public order. It was a thinly veiled threat. But the people were ready. The evening that followed, dozens of volunteers spread out across the city, quietly distributing maps of legal rights, guides on how to document police activity, and emergency contacts for community defense teams. There were no chants, no crowds, just people acting as if the city had no power over them anymore. The fight was no longer against an individual or a single institution. It was against a system that had woven itself into the very fabric of society. But now, people knew they had something stronger than that, each other. They knew that every step they took in solidarity made them harder to erase. The system could try to crush them, but it would always have to reckon with what they had already built. Tyson was no longer the face of the movement. The movement had no single face anymore. It was countless people, each contributing what they could. In the end, that was the power they had. The city had underestimated them. But they were no longer fighting to be seen. They were fighting to be remembered, to be undeniable. And they were. The tension in the city was palpable. The threats had escalated. The pressure from the government and corporate developers reached new heights. They had tried every trick in the book. Public smear campaigns, disinformation, and even hiring provocateurs to infiltrate the movement. But it didn't work. The community only grew stronger, more united. The more the system tried to suppress them, the more their resistance expanded. Tyson kept his distance. He knew his presence was now more symbolic than strategic. He'd set the stage, now it was up to others to carry the weight. He still visited the outposts, spoke to the leaders, but he had learned the true power of the movement lay in its decentralized nature. It wasn't about one person anymore. It was about everyone working together, everyone contributing to something bigger than themselves. Ernestine's bookstore, The Long Memory, had become a critical node in the network. It wasn't just a place to learn or read, it was the heart of the resistance, the hub where people gathered to strategize, to organize, to fight back. When the developers tried to tear down a nearby building, the community rallied around it, blocking construction workers, holding teach-ins, and creating legal barricades to prevent the demolition. It was a war of attrition. Small victories piled up, each one pushing the system closer to its breaking point. But the system wasn't stupid. It adapted. The mayor announced a new initiative, a community reform commission, claiming it would address concerns about police brutality, gentrification, and the rising tide of resistance. It sounded good. Too good. But Tyson saw through it. He knew it was a trap. The commission would be another token gesture, designed to pacify the people without changing anything meaningful. He gathered the leaders together, and they came to one conclusion: they would not participate. Instead, they launched a counter-initiative. The People's Commission, a community-driven initiative focused on real change. They would take matters into their own hands. They would bring the issues to the table that the government refused to acknowledge: housing rights, police accountability, and dismantling the systems that allowed the rich to profit off the suffering of the poor. The first meeting of the People's Commission was held at the Long Memory. It was a small crowd, mostly activists, but they were determined. Maya took the lead, speaking about the need to build a coalition of working-class people, artists, community organizers, and anyone else willing to fight for a better future. She spoke of a vision where power wasn't concentrated in the hands of the elite, but distributed among those who had been historically silenced. As she spoke, the energy in the room shifted. People began to feel the weight of their collective power. This wasn't just a protest movement anymore. This was a movement for true systemic change. They were no longer asking for justice. They were demanding it. Outside, the protests continued, but they had become more organized, more targeted. They didn't just disrupt traffic or gather at City Hall. They took action where it mattered most. They shut down eviction hearings, disrupted high-level meetings between city officials and developers, and staged sit-ins at corporate offices. Ernestine was at the center of it all, not as a leader, but as a guiding force. Her experience, her wisdom, and her unshakable conviction had become the foundation upon which the movement stood. She was the glue that held it together. Her voice, calm and steady, reminded everyone that they were fighting not just for their homes, but for their dignity. One afternoon, a group of young activists came to her with an idea. They wanted to create a campaign highlighting the stories of those who had been displaced, those who had lost everything to the city's aggressive gentrification tactics. They would focus on the people, the real faces of the struggle, to remind the public that this was not just a political issue, it was a human one. Ernestine loved the idea. She knew that stories had power. They had the power to change minds, to shift narratives. She had seen it happen before, with her own story. If they could humanize the struggle, if they could show the faces of those who had been forgotten, they might be able to shift the conversation. As the campaign took shape, the city began to feel the pressure. The media, once so quick to report on the violence and chaos, couldn't ignore the compelling stories being told by the people. Activists brought their testimonies to the streets, to the news, to social media. The stories spread like wildfire, capturing the hearts of people who had never been affected by gentrification or police violence but now saw the struggle as their own. The city's response was swift. They deployed officers to intimidate the protesters, to break up the gatherings. They arrested a few key organizers, hoping to destabilize the movement. But it didn't work. If anything, it made the movement stronger. The arrests only fueled the fire, solidifying the resolve of the community. Tyson watched from the sidelines, proud of the way the people had taken ownership of the fight. They had learned how to bend without breaking. A few days later, the mayor called for an emergency meeting with city leaders. The pressure had reached a boiling point. The media was no longer just covering the protests, they were demanding answers. The people were no longer content with empty promises. They wanted action. Tyson wasn't invited to the meeting. He hadn't expected to be. The city knew his influence was powerful, but they didn't know how to control it. They thought they could ignore him. They thought they could ignore the movement. But they had underestimated the power of collective action. In the meeting, the mayor proposed a new development plan that would include affordable housing and create community spaces. But Tyson knew it was just another ploy to placate the masses. The people weren't fooled. They saw right through it. Ernestine's voice was heard in every corner of the city now. Her book, What I Remember So You Don't Have To, had become a symbol of resistance. It wasn't just a collection of stories, it was a blueprint for change. People carried it with them, quoting passages during protests, using it as a guide to confront the system that had sought to oppress them. The battle was far from over. There were still fights to be fought, people to be freed, and victories to be won. But now, the system knew it was no longer in control. The people had taken back their power. Tyson stood at the edge of the battle, watching as the community fought for what was theirs. He didn't need to be in the front anymore. He had done his part. The movement was no longer his. It belonged to everyone who had stood up, who had fought back, and who had never stopped believing that change was possible. The fight wasn't over, but now they were fighting on their own terms. The power had shifted. The future was theirs.